Great. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Align with Gen Z in the Age of AI. I am your moderator, Susie, yet today. Together with my SEFI colleague, Clara from ENSTA, Polytechnic Institute of Paris, we will be facilitating a discussion about how we can better align with Gen Z in the age of AI. And what are the opportunities, challenges, and best practices to be shared with this community? So this webinar is brought to you by the SEFI Attractiveness Special Interest Group. We are a passionate group aiming to build a community and space for students, educators, researchers, industry members, and others to share ideas, strategies, and best practices, and research results to enhance the attractiveness of engineering. If you want to join in us, if you are curious about us, please do reach out or scan the QR code here to get in touch. So we are about to get started with today's webinar. Here are just a couple of house rules. I have to warn you, this session will be recorded. So please, the use of camera is optional. And this session will also be posted on SEFI's YouTube and the website channels. So eventually you'll have an opportunity to go back to the presentation and the discussions if you wish. At the end of this session, we will have some time for a Q&A. So please do feel free to share your questions or have a discussion in the chat section. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Clara, to tell us a little bit more about the intention and the goal we are trying to achieve with this webinar. Clara, if you want to speak.
Good afternoon to everybody. So in the late 80s, teachers opposed to use of calculators in schools. They feared technology would weaken learning. History showed exactly the opposite. And calculators became tools that supported thinking and not replaced it. Today, education faces a similar moment with AI, and the question is no longer whether to resist, regulate, or embrace AI. The real question is, how do we align its use with today's learners? Especially Generation Z, the first generation to grow up fully connected, digital, and immersed in technology. Susie, thank you. We are witnessing a rapid transformation in the relationship between AI and higher education, with evolving role of all stakeholders. First, teachers and educators have no choice but to integrate AI into their everyday teaching practices. They need to rethink adapt their methods, and they need to ensure that teaching and learning remain effective. This transition is not easy, and most educators were not trained for it. Many are still exploring how to use AI in educational settings. At the same time, significant changes in taking place in industry and in the way companies operate, driven by the rapid development and adopting of AI. As a result, expectations regarding graduates' competencies are evolving, with EA literacy emerging as key competencies for the workforce of tomorrow. And students are changing too. They are using AI more and more in their daily learning. It is changing how they study. how they solve problems, and how they develop their competencies. In my engineering school, for example, students recently created a new association called LISIA. This association is dedicated to developing AI literacy for secondary school students. In other words, students are not only learners anymore, they are becoming educators themselves. This is particularly inspiring, and it perfectly illustrates how roles are being redefined in the age of AI. So this is the main reason that we are initiated this webinar to talk about this transformation.
Thank you, Clara, for setting the context for today and providing a great live example of how Gen Z is taking an active and a proactive role in shaping how AI is used and could be used in education. So in today's webinar, we invite speakers from different backgrounds, experiences, institutions, and focuses to discuss this topic from different perspectives. We have a Gen Z student perspective on shifting expectations by Eva from TU Delft. Welcome, Eva. We have an academic perspective on learning and educational design by Professor Jan Allen from KU Leuven. Welcome, Jan. We also have an industry perspective on AI adoption, digital workplaces, and governance by Amanda from Bentley Systems. Welcome, Amanda, joining us from the US in the morning. So let's get started with Eva's student perspective. Eva works with a team of students dedicated to bring in the student perspective into educational innovation at TU Delft. So one of their projects is their white paper in AI in education for practical suggestions with a focus on shifting from AI restriction towards AI support and guidances. Eva, the floor is yours. Please do share your insights.
Thank you, Susie, for your nice introduction. So my name is Eva and I'm a master's student in technical medicine at the TU Delft in the Netherlands. And as Susie said, I am joining this seminar on behalf of SPICE, which stands for Students as Partners in Co-Creating Education. And I will shortly introduce what SPICE is on the next slide. Thank you. SPICE is a team of 11 students from all TU Delft faculties. And we are a student team that gives input on giving the student perspective into educational innovation at the university, which means that we gather the student input and the student perspective on projects and current aspects at TU Delft. So some of the projects we did are AI in education, which will be presented in this seminar, but also lecture attendance. So how can we improve the lecture attendance, belonging in education? How can you make sure everyone feels like they belong at a university? And another project we recently did is co-creating in education. So how can you include the student perspective more within your educational developments? So that's some of the background, and then we can move on to the next slide. Because what I'm here to talk about is our AI in education project. So this is a project we did in 2024, and we investigated the what, why, who, and how students using AI in education at TU Delft. And this project was just conducted in 2024, which means that some of the findings might already be different because AI is evolving so fast, but I will talk a little bit about that later as well. And what we did in this project, we did a big student survey, we did interviews, and we did a food for thought session, which is a method we as a group very often use to gather student input in a very informal way. So this is also what you see in the image. So we gather input and we brainstorm with participants in a very informal way. And then you can move on to the next slides. And then one of the things we asked in the survey is, how much AI do you use related to education? And then on the x-axis, you can see the different faculties at TU Delft. And then the y-axis shows the percentage of respondents. And then you can see that the blue bars indicate daily AI use. So you can see that for most faculties, students use AI daily, which gave us a good foundation for this project because AI is used a lot, whereas we don't really know what they use it for. So that's what we did next. So if you can go to the next slide. So we noticed within our project that there's a couple of reasons why students use AI in their education. So what we saw most were brainstorming, so brainstorming ideas, brainstorming concepts, programming, so coding assignments, explaining concepts, writing and improving texts to different extents. So some students said they were actually making AI write their pieces, whereas others wrote them themselves and let AI tools give feedback. And then another thing was literature studies. So letting AI help you with finding relevant articles on specific topics. Then we also asked the students, why should you be allowed to use AI and why shouldn't you be allowed to use AI in education? And we saw that there were several reasons. And there were some of the reasons were really separate ones. So for example, the ethical considerations and the limits to AI usage, but a lot of them were intertwined. So students said you should be allowed to use AI because it can make your writing easier and it could also make it better quality, whereas other students said you shouldn't be allowed to use AI in your writing as it makes you not able to write your own text. So a lot of the students were really looking for a balance in which they could use AI in a way to enhance their projects, but that it did not limit their learning objectives. So when we move to the next slide, what we as SPICE wrote down as we saw that a lot of students had a lot of questions about this. So we also asked, what would you want to know on AI and what would you want the TU Delft to tell you or to educate you on? And some of the questions were, how can I verify generated output? How can I use AI responsibly? How can I get the most out of AI and what is or is not allowed within my education? And for this, we proposed a framework where we said the university cannot determine everything. So we said the university should have some guidelines and a vision on the future of AI. And within these guidelines, the study programs can, for example, give an AI literacy course at the beginning, which you also do for current citing and that kind of stuff, which can help students to be responsible in their AI use. So what we, for example, also saw is that I am currently a master's student, and that means that I knew how AI worked before generative AI became a thing. So that means I will probably be more aware of the consequences, whereas younger students, or even, for example, preschoolers, are already using AI without knowing what artificial intelligence means, how it works, what it does, which means that it will probably be likely to when they go to university, to educate them on how it works, what the risks and the benefits are. And then on a course level, we say all educators should add a section stating very clearly what you can and cannot use AI for based on certain learning objectives. So this is also something we discussed quite a lot. So the use of AI should also be dependent on the learning objectives of a course. So what would you want students to be able to do? So in your course, is it important that the student can write a very cohesive report? Or is that not one of their learning objectives? So for example, in the Faculty of Industrial Engineering, students currently do not get any coding, so no programming at all. So maybe you can let them use AI for coding because that enhances what they can do outside of their curriculum with things that are not necessarily learning objectives. So it's also very course dependent and very faculty dependent. Yeah, you can move on. So that's very shortly what we did in our project and what our findings were. We will do questions at the end, but on the bottom of this page, you can scan the QR code and it will lead you to the SPICE webpage, on which you can find all of our projects, so also the white paper on students using AI that we wrote. And then
Thank you very much, Eva. That was a great presentation. We will address the question from the audience later in the Q&A session, but I do have a question to you and would love to hear your student perspective on this. So what are your expectations on teaching staffs and learning now that you can find answers to general questions or even solve relatively complex equations, visualizations, 3D models, etc.? Can you let us know what your expectations are?
I think what you also mentioned in the introduction is that we really want to shift from restrictions and rules to support and guidance. So as we noticed that a lot of students really feel the need for some guidance in what they can and cannot use AI for, or how they can use AI to enhance their learning. And what some of the students mentioned, which we found a funny analogy, was that students say you should view a generative AI tool as like a peer or a drunk educator, was what other students also said. So you can use AI to help you in your learning, but you should always check or validate the answers that are given. And that's, I think, the message that educators should give out to their students as well, that it's not a replacement, but it can really enhance your learning. Also, what we see with other digital alternatives, that a lot of students learn in different ways. So a lecture where an educator is presenting in front of 100 students may not be a suitable way for every student. So for example, some students may learn better with YouTube videos, or from a book, or from a lecture recording, or by letting generative AI explain certain concepts to you. So I think educators should really educate students on AI use and on the learning objectives of the course. But they should also be aware that students learn in different ways, and that education is evolving in that sense.
Thank you very much. I do like the idea that students learn different ways. Now we are going to move on to hear the educator's perspective, since Eva has told us a little bit about her expectations. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Clara, to introduce our next speaker.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Jan Ellen, who is a full professor at TU Leuven in Belgium, within the research unit Educational Sciences and the Center for Instructional Psychology and Technology. His research focuses on designing learning environments that support complex learning in higher education, with particular interest in both technology in education and technology of education. He has published extensively in leading international scientific journals, and is currently concluding two exciting research projects on AI integration in Flemish education and teacher education in the age of generative AI. So I would like to give you the floor, Jan.
Thanks a lot for this very nice introduction, and thank you for inviting me. It's of course a little bit a challenge to do things in such a short period, but I want to do with you three basic things. I want to tell something about learning, the use of Gen AI in view of learning, and the design of learning environments, or given that we are here in the SEFI context, you might also call it the engineering of learning environments. Let me first go a little bit about learning, so that we all understand what we might AI for in view of that learning. And the first thing is that after a lot of years, people have come up with a number of characteristics of learning, both for Gen Z students as well as non-Gen Z students. A few basic elements. First, learning is an active process. You learn what you do. The second point is it's a constructive process. Knowledge is not something that is given to you. Knowledge is something that you create. We create our own knowledge, with as a consequence that the knowledge between people, between students, also differ. A third thing is that active and constructive process is also a cumulative process. We learn and we interpret new information based on what we know already. A fourth thing is that it is self-regulated. We learn what we want to learn. Nobody can force you to learn something. You decide yourself what you learn. And a final thing is that learning is situated. You learn always in a context. Or to say it a little bit in another way, you learn what you do in a particular context based on what you know already. Or nobody and nothing can learn on behalf of somebody else. That is kind of important when we start to talk about AI. A lot of people have started to think already about how we can use AI, generative AI, also in a performance or in a learning context. And one of those people is Kukurova. And he's a very brilliant guy, and he has distinguished between 4 different ways in which in education AI is used or can be used. There's the complementarity paradigm, then there is high human control and basic, still low automation through AI. There's the synergy paradigm, where automation through AI is high, but still there is a lot of human control. And then there is the fourth one there, which is the replacement paradigm. And then AI is doing things on behalf of... My camera is not working anymore. On behalf of the student. Somebody else, namely Malik and Malik, they have distinguished, and I think Eva already basically referred to it, that you can use AI in very, very different ways. You can use AI as a mentor. Then AI provides feedback to you. You can use AI or AI tools as a tutor, providing direct instruction to you. It can be used as a coach. Then it will prompt your metacognition, will prompt you to engage in reflection. It can be a teammate, thinking like a colleague, like a peer. AI can also be regarded to be a student. And I think that this was already mentioned as well. Then it's up to you as a learner, as a student, to teach AI. It can also be used as a simulator, deliberate practice, so that you can do a lot of exercises. And finally, you can use it as a tool. And in that case, Gen AI is accomplishing a number of tasks, helping or on behalf of the student. Now, the basic rule, and I hope you understand me a little bit in this, is that given the nature of learning, using it as a tool is basically a little bit problematic, because then you assume that AI will learn on behalf of you. Given all this, we are confronted with the interesting phenomenon that any discussion on educational technology, on the use of technology for educational purposes, immediately results in a question on the technology of education, the engineering of education. And in that respect, I think the following scheme is kind of interesting. What do we want to achieve? Or what is a high characteristic of good learning environments? It is an environment in which there is full alignment between what we aim to learn, what the learning objectives are, the teaching and learning activities, and the assessment methods. In that case, students do what they have to do in order to learn what we want them to learn. That's the basic, the ultimate for professors, for teachers, the ultimate aim. Make learners engage in those activities that enhance the probability they will learn what we want them to learn. And given those characteristics of learning, it is important that the thing that we want them to learn, that they will have to do it themselves. And for that, those aspects, Gen AI or AI cannot be used, or it's not advised to use AI for those purposes as a tool. Finally, there is the regular use of AI. And a lot of AI tools are performance-oriented. They help us to do things more efficiently. On the other hand, there is the educational use of AI. There we want it's learning-oriented. It's not performance-oriented. And so the educational use of AI differs dramatically from the regular use of AI. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
You can take over.
Thank you, Jan, for this very instructive and very well constructed presentation that we enjoyed, and it was very, very, I think that in line with students' presentation. We have a question from mainly educators, because in lots of higher education classroom, we are embarrassed with student proficiency in using AI. And we would like to ask you, based on your researches, on your studies, what would you recommend teachers and educators, especially in engineering school, where this proficiency is at a very high level? I experience it every day. And have to align to students' rising use of AI, and also with the expectation. And what's your advice for this?
Thank you very much for this very challenging question. For me, and I hope it's a little bit in line with what I said earlier, the basic thing is that students and teachers in the future will discuss much more what do we want to learn, what is really essential to learn. And I think that we can do that in collaboration with the students. I don't think that we can simply impose it. And as you say, you're working with students who are very proficient, who are very ambitious, who want to learn. And then if we can come to an agreement, this is what we want to learn, together with the students to decide how are we gonna run that learning process. What do you expect from me as a teacher? What will you use AI for? And what will you do in order to achieve your important learning ambitions? I think that if we simply impose a number of objectives, students will very, very easily find a way to do it in the most efficient way. And so they will come up with something, as it was said, do we still want students, engineering students, all kinds of students, to be able to write full text? If that is the case, that we really want it and we have good reasons, we will have to convince the students about its importance. Otherwise, students will find whatever way to ask AI to simply write it. The more students will be convinced that it's in their own interest and aligns to their own ambitions that they want to learn something, the more they will be intrinsically motivated, the higher the probability that they will use AI in a very suitable way and in a very productive way.
Thank you very much. So, as I noted, we have to co-create or the educational use of AI with our students in the future. This is the only way to work with it effectively.
I think so.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Eva. Last but not least, we have a industry employer perspective from Amanda. So Amanda is a solution owner of AI digital workplace at Bentley Systems. Today, she will talk to us about AI industry adoption strategies, challenges as industry we are still solving, as well as Gen Z forward opportunities. So the floor is yours, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Susie. Hello, everyone. It is really lovely to be here with all of you. As Susie said, I'm Amanda Oliva, and I'm a solution owner of the AI digital workplace at Bentley Systems, which is the infrastructure engineering software company. So if you've ever driven over a bridge, taken a train, or walked into a building, there's a good chance a Bentley product helped design, build, or operate it. Bentley makes the software that engineers around the world use in infrastructure. Now, I'm going to talk about what we're trying to do with AI internally. Gen Z is the first generation to enter the workforce where AI is already embedded. So we imagine that they often don't see it as a new technology, but as an expected infrastructure. My primary objective as a solution owner is to weave AI naturally into how Bentley works rather than treating it as a separate initiative. I really want it to feel intuitive and genuinely useful for everyone and not just another tool to learn. And it's interesting that the other two panelists and I both had a theme of learning to bring today. So also I'm speaking of learning, and I believe that learning by doing is popular and effective in all generations, but the preference for hands-on learning seems extra true of Gen Z, and that is actually how AI adoption works best. And we see this theme emphasized at Bentley in our top levels of leadership. As you can see, our CTO says the best first step is your curiosity and experimentation. Similar to that, our CIO also says your curiosity is the best place to start. Explore, experiment, see what works. And my philosophy is first to invite AI to everything and then work like a centaur. I borrowed this analogy from a book I read by Ethan Mollick. I'm not sure if that is also the Mollick that Juan was talking about. That's a coincidence, called A Co-Intelligence. So in Greek mythology, a centaur is a creature with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. So the analogy is about a deliberate division of labor where the human in the head leads and directs the AI, the body. I really want my colleagues to jump right in and experience how good it feels to have just an ever-present thinking partner and just raise the ceiling on any work stream they're engaged in. But we also need to learn that enterprise AI comes with guardrails, governance, and consequences that personal AI tools don't. So Gen Z's instincts are right on: curiosity, experimentation, and hands-on learning. But we in industry just need to channel and support those approaches with helpful guardrails. Another principle that has emerged in the last 6 months is that AI isn't about betting on a single tool or a model, but investing in ways of working that can adapt over time. The future engineer won't master one AI tool. They'll develop judgment about when to use which tool and why. You can go to the next slide, please. On to some challenges. Some colleagues can't imagine working without AI. Others are cautious or resistant. So building a culture where both perspectives coexist is ongoing work. We've built a well-maintained resource site, a consistent communication cadence, and opt-in AI circles. Those are our Microsoft Teams channels where we try to bring all generations and roles together so they can find inspiration, support, and answers. But even with those things, we realize there's still a discovery gap. So we experience similar pain points as educators. People just don't always find the resources that exist. One of my personal biggest frustrations is I think it's a common experience for all of us working in fast-paced environments is that we get so many notifications, email, Teams, Slack. It all becomes noise and no one ping or announcement stands out from the rest. Another challenge is that AI tools evolve faster than governance. Gen Z adopts tools instantly, so governance has to keep pace with that. Also, measuring real impact is hard. Quantifying productivity gains or time saved with AI is really difficult. Everyone that engages in the AIs, including Gen Z, wants to see what they're doing with it matters. So if we can't show the impact, we lose engagement. Being a global and mostly remote company is another challenge. You can't simply get everyone into a room, give out fun swag, or guarantee everyone turns on notifications in their Teams channels. Gen Z entered the workforce in a world that's heavy on working remotely. So interactions through digital channels replace in-person conversations. We have to look at many different angles as possible to achieve this full adoption. And last but certainly not least is just the challenge in trusting AI. We need to understand its limits. Like hallucinations are a real thing for sure, and overdependence can be a risk. I feel confident in saying that industry doesn't have this fully figured out. So once again, what we value most is curiosity and adaptability. You can move to the next slide, please. In this section on opportunities, I've looked at some data around Gen Z. Let's see if these statistics seem right to you, though. Reverse mentorship. It seems clear that Gen Z employees are actively helping older colleagues adopt AI tools and bridging those generational divides. Gen Z is also using AI as a real-time communication coach to navigate human interaction more confidently. This is a legitimate skill-building behavior. You can also see that Salesforce research shows Gen Z surpasses all other generations in 2 key behaviors. We've talked about them already a lot: curiosity and experimentation. For example, they're more comfortable using AI outside their original skill sets, like AI-assisted coding. I really love that. And the concept of an AI teammate isn't foreign to them, it's expected. So the opportunity here is to leverage this comfort level and let Gen Z help design how digital teammates integrate into real workflows. Next slide, please. And next, best practices. First, I prefer the term better practices because best implies a finality, like there's no room for improvement. And in AI, the bar moves daily. Everything I'm sharing is what's working now. Ask me again in 6 months and the list might look a little different. But when we get these opportunities and better practices right, we see early career engineers and any colleague adopting AI treat it like a thinking partner, not an answer engine. So Gen Z's natural instinct to experiment first and iterate is exactly the adoption behavior we want from everyone. Like I said, we don't have all the answers yet, but we'd rather figure it out with curious engineers than overly cautious ones. So I'll leave you with this: experiment, iterate, discern, all 3. That is the engineer that AI cannot replace.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Curiosity is the word that appears a lot in your presentation. So I'm curious, I have a question to you from employer perspective. What would you expect from new graduates in terms of their proficiency in using AI for individual tasks and teamwork, especially when you have different generations of colleagues within a team? What do you expect them to bring?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I can say to answer that, I feel like hopefully it was interwoven in what I presented. And essentially the core message I feel is still that AI doesn't replace engineers. It amplifies the ones who ask better questions and validates the outputs and understands the context. So fundamentals still matter maybe more than ever. I think we look for systems thinking. I think we look for reasoning with subject matter expert principles, and just really knowing when something doesn't look right. So AI can generate an answer, but only a human engineer can say, hey, this doesn't make sense in the real world. I think that AI fluency is the new baseline, not AI expertise per se. So having AI skills really means knowing what tool to use and writing good prompts and iterating and not accepting first answers. And of course, cross-checking your results with your source data. I think that something else that's always important is collaboration over, solo brilliance. So engineers will also collaborate with AI the same way you collaborate with other teammates and colleagues. If we think back to that centaur analogy, they will lead the algorithm. So the best engineers today will be the ones who know how to explain their thinking. I think if I could think of like a short list of what we would expect from graduates, are more like thinking postures and attitudes, really. So I think I already talked about AI fluency being like knowing when to use it and iterate with it. And then the prompt engineering is essentially more of a communication tool, just the same way that you would explain a problem to your teammate or maybe give instructions of a task clearly to someone who reports to you. That's really what we're looking for, of how you can, get the best outcome out of your prompts. Then we're also looking for judgment over speed. Anyone can generate output from an AI, even my kids, but engineers must know when something doesn't make sense. And then we talked about governance or guardrails, understanding that AI and industry comes with that and responsibilities. And also, maybe most importantly, is adaptability. The tools will change, but the skill that lasts is learning how to learn.
I love all that. Thank you, Amanda, Yang, and Eva. It was really great to hear all different perspectives, but I think the ideas are quite aligned. Now we have 20 minutes left for open discussions. So, Clara, do we see questions coming from the audience in the chat or Q&A? Or do we have most voted questions coming from the audience?
Not for the moment, but we have just finished the last presentation, so I encourage everybody to ask questions. We discussed we have a presentation with lots of topics, different subtopics from different point of view. So don't hesitate to put in the chat box your questions.
While we are waiting, let me wrap this up. Sorry, share my screen again. Right.
So we have some other questions, from our SIG groups. And one of the questions is to academics and industry. What do you find challenging aligning to Generation Z expectation and adaptation with the AI? For example, have to develop meaningful relationship with teacher in this different context. So I would like to ask Jan and Amanda to address this question from different point of view.
I think perhaps the Gen Z is that's going to be still a little bit easy when it comes to AI, because a lot of academics still can relate to them, as Gen Z have still experienced a period where there was no AI. I think the major problem is going to come at the moment that you have students for whom AI is basically has been there always, and it is like a smartphone. I mean, it's not something that wasn't there, and so it will be at a certain moment. It might be really become difficult to encourage them to take their own learning in their own hands. And so they will have been trained for years and years and years to use AI to make their life easy. And basically, we will have to convince them to make their life a little bit more difficult by doing themselves what AI could also do. And that's going to be a difficult message from time to time, I think.
I'll just hop in with the industry perspective. I think one of the challenges is that Gen Z expects the AI to all be figured out already, and we're still definitely evolving. I mean, it's not fast enough for them. So that kind of respecting of the guardrails that we're trying to build while keeping the pace of how AI tools are constantly changing, and being able to empower them to create those solutions and be innovative, but while we be responsible at the same time. I think that's the biggest challenge for us in industry.
I think we have a lot more questions coming from the chat. There was one question to Yang. There's question to Amanda as well. Who wants to go first?
I can take the Socratic one. So in any case, if we, I think most educators and most of my colleagues will prefer the specifically trained bot, so the Socratic teacher over the general AI kinds of applications. But the issue is, that makes the whole AI turn in education so particular and so fascinating. For years and years and years, when the discussion was about the use of technology in education, we were looking at teachers. It were teachers who decided what was going to be used. And so they could say, we will use this tool or that tool. But now it's clear that the agency, the initiative to use it often does not primarily come from the teachers, but is coming from the students themselves. So, which is remarkable and very interesting. But so those Socratic teachers' tools or bots might be to be preferred. The problem is going to be a little bit that we do not know whether students will actually prefer those things and will be self-regulated enough to opt for those bots instead of the bots that makes their life easy. So it's a double answer a little bit.
I'll answer Abel's question. He says, from your industry perspective, what is your impression of changing graduate skills requirements by engineering employers given the rise of Gen AI, and how should we adapt our courses to meet these changing requirements? That's definitely a big question. I don't know like the specifics of engineering per se, but I do really believe that it's the fundamentals that still matter more than ever. So maybe in your curriculum, it would be that teaching AI literacy, not specifically the expertise about, you don't need to know about what machine learning is or things like that, but how to use AI tools in a responsible way, when to not use AI, critical thinking, all things that are not going out of style for sure, understanding what AI can and can't do for you. I think teaching governance awareness would be a great part of the curriculum. I feel like both Eva and Jan touched on some of these other ideas for educators, and just that attitude and posture more towards it, adaptability, than like a list of this is what engineers should do with AI. That's my feeling of what we're hiring for right now, especially at Bentley.
Thank you both. I know Eva is close to entering the workforce, so I wonder, what do you think about it? Now you're standing in the middle of between student and the future employee.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think a lot of students might experience the same thing. So I am currently doing an internship at a company. And then I also noticed the switch in what you were taught and also what you can use in your practice. And then I think because I'm a bit at the beginning of the using AI in education, I noticed that in my education, there were a lot of restrictions. So a lot of educators said, you cannot use AI limits your learning. And then when I joined the company, they said, oh, you can just make AI do that, or oh, writing shouldn't take that long, you can just make AI write it. And I think that differs a lot per company as well, how they view that, but it's also good to teach students to be prepared for what the perspective towards AI can be in different companies and how that can be how that is seen by different companies, and how you can teach students how they can use that, if that makes sense.
Perfect. I think we are able to take live questions if anyone wants to. I mean, our speakers are also allowed to take to ask questions. So if that's interesting to any speakers or audience, we can have a live question. You can simply raise your hand or unmute yourself We still have a few questions unaddressed in the chat, perhaps. I think we have a question. I'm not sure if this one has been answered. There has been a lot of talk about how engineers might face unemployment in various fields. In this context, what are the most important competencies engineers should possess and the next steps they should take? I think we've touched this question from different speakers in other questions when they're addressing other questions. But if anyone want to jump in to take this one, please feel free to do so.
I do think that the arrival of AI will have tremendous effects on curricula, also for future engineers. My expectation, but it's of course with a lot of carefulness to say something like this, because it's about the future and nobody knows what's going to happen, but that the presence of AI will raise the bar for students. Instead of learning less, I think they will be expected to learn far more. Now, that's going to be extremely difficult because, the level is that high already. And so probably there will be some tendency towards specialization on the one hand and general skills on the other hand. So there will be, you will have to know a whole lot or be very competent in a domain so that you basically can be better than AI in that specific domain. And on the other hand, you will have to develop a number of competencies to collaborate, to be very reflective. And I prefer reflective over critical thinking, because critical thinking it has another connotation, but you have to be a little bit reflective, that you're always on your guard. Yeah, everything that you get is constructed, and so you know it's constructed, but you will not always have all the knowledge to adequately assess the quality of what is offered to you. And so we will have to, on the one hand, invest in making students very, very competent in specific domains, and on the other hand, also develop a number of attitudes, a number of kind of ways of behaving, so that they are prudent and know that they may know a lot, but only about a few things, and that they will have to look for other people to jointly do the kind of work.
Thank you, Jan. I know Amanda mentioned the Gen Z forward opportunities. So I assume that comes with new opportunities for new jobs. So perhaps that if you can add to this question, or Eva, since you are in an internship, you probably also have experience or discovering new opportunity to work with AI. What do you think? Feel free to share your insights.
I guess I could answer that just with an example. I think, AI opens a lot of opportunities for those of us who don't have coding skills or engineering skills. We could vibe code an app or something like that. But that doesn't mean we understand how it got created, the source code, or how to deploy it. We still need those people who to validate those outputs and to use judgment and have that subject matter expertise of making those kind of judgment decisions. So I think maybe a lot of that will evolve into different positions or different roles within engineering or software developers that will be more called upon to do the validation and the judging and like the evaluation of things that are created. Just a thought.
Thank you, Amanda.
We have received we have received a very interesting question for Julie Derenga. It's about the way of the classroom activities. It's very interesting for teachers. Who will be able to get students in the classroom? If it's not compulsory, for example, amphitheater lecturers, these amphitheaters are nearly empty today if it's not compulsory. It's really asked the question of learning as a social activity. That's very important. That's the future progression in this sense, because learning going to the university is a kind of social integration, social interaction.
I think I can say something about this. So as SPICE, we recently did a project on lecture attendance as well, because we also saw, and a lot of educators saw as well, that the lecture attendance was declining very rapidly. And I think the most important thing is to realize that the goal is never to make students show up. So the goal is never to have a full lecture hall with a lot of students. The goal is to guide students in achieving their learning objectives. So we talk to a lot of students on why do you go to lectures or why don't you go to lectures? And we noticed that, for example, social engagement, cohesion, but also having a routine in your week so that every week is the same, are good reasons for students to attend lectures. However, what we realized is that maybe within these changing times of changing education, the lecture, the way we give it right now, is not the most optimal way to guide students in reaching these learning objectives. So when designing your courses, you should always be aware of how can I make students achieve these goals rather than how can I make students show up to my lecture. And maybe Jan has something to say on that as well.
No, I totally agree. And it reminds me about a study we did, I think now about 35 years ago. So there was the whole issue of open universities and self-instructional self-study materials that was there. And so we also did a study at that time to ask, would you like lectures to be there, still to be there or not? And then exactly what you said, Eva, came out. Yeah, students want those kind of moments scheduled for basically two reasons. Yeah, to regulate their week, and so that they know, oh, you're still learning, and because they are social animals. They like to see other people. And if you schedule it in the week, then at least you know my colleagues, my peers are going to be there. Otherwise, you have to invest a whole lot of time in finding out where are you and when will we meet. And so it's a very efficient way to have social networks. And as I said, the design of those learning environments, exactly as you say, Eva, is extremely important, that there is alignment between what we want and what we ask students to do, and because between what we want and how we assess it. And only if you have a good alignment between those three elements, you will have something worthwhile to attend. And sometimes it's attending a lecture, sometimes it's perhaps to do a project or do something completely on your own. So I agree with what Eva was saying.
Thank you, Eva and Jan. This was a very insightful answer that is very, very, how can I say, it is in line with or as an educator, everyday questioning how to do it. And this was a real answer guiding us in what direction to go. And also, I think that you answered the next questions also related to competencies development. It's about online learning and experimental, active or experimental learning. I don't know if there is another, we have time, maybe, no, we have not really time for direct question, because I see the the time is over, unfortunately.
I think you're right. We are on top of the hour. So I want to thank all the speakers, everyone who participated to make it such an engaging discussion, and everybody brought different perspectives. I certainly learned a lot today, and I think the conversation will continue offline, of course. We do have some references and resources, and this session is recorded and will be shared afterwards. So please do feel free to rewatch it, reach out to our speakers' LinkedIn, stay in touch, and we will see you in next one.